You have many years experience in IP in the United States. How is the current COVID-19 situation affecting the legal sector in general, and which are the major changes you've seen in the last few months?
What we're seeing now in the U.S. is, at least on the IP side and the enforcement side, particularly in the life sciences area, which is where I do the large share of my work, is that there's still a lot of activity. The IP enforcement is still going on. The patent litigation has to progress, and the patents are as important, if not more important than ever. The place where we're seeing a real shift is that the enforcement depends on the courts, and the courts are struggling now in the U.S. with the COVID restrictions. And so everything sort of flows from that. That's been the experience. And at the beginning of this whole process, in early March, I think it was, we started to see a small changes in the courts. In other words, we got a couple of notices from a couple of courts about not letting people in if they had a fever, or, those were kind of the early days. And we saw that and we thought, this is going to grow exponentially. This is going to grow at an exponential rate. And so we immediately set up a website on our firm website. It's www.paulhastings.com/US court closings. I think I got that right. And we started updating that daily to show what was happening in the courts. And as predicted, you could see that website start to change exponentially. One day it was 2 courts, then it was 4, then it was all the courts, then the restrictions were closings, and and it happened very fast. And now virtually all the courts have restrictions in terms of no in-person hearings, and then of course the courts have to focus on their criminal cases under the Constitution. And then the Speedy Trial Act, they have to give very strict attention to the criminal docket. So all of this has had a fallout in terms of the litigation, in terms of the schedules. And sort of like a if you think of a spring, it's sort of like pulled the spring out for now. And so that's what we're kind of seeing, is sort of an expansion of the schedule. And then eventually the compression will happen again. But that's kind of the impact that we're seeing right now.
Right. You had mentioned to me the last time we spoke in regards to the Hatch-Waxman, in regards to the 30-month stay. Is that what you were referring to currently now in regards to, because there was a lot of delays in the court system? So is this something directly affecting? I've noticed you had something on your website. You had an article directly affecting that. Is that something you'd be able to share a little bit more about?
Absolutely. So in the life science space, so in the criminal space, we talked about how there's pressure to get the criminal cases done. In civil litigation, generally speaking, the courts feel a little more freedom to extend the schedule and slow things down. But in Hatch-Waxman Act cases in the United States, the generic pharmaceutical patent litigation, there's an added pressure because the Hatch-Waxman Act, which provides for the litigation involving the pharmaceuticals, defines a window basically for you to get your litigation done. It's called a 30-month stay, and it's a 30-month period. It could be a little longer if it's a new chemical entity. It's complicated. But the point is that there's this window that the courts are well aware of in which they try to get the litigation done. What has happened because of that expansion, as I mentioned, there's a risk that you might not be able to get your case done in the time that the court originally set the schedule for. And again, we sort of anticipated this might happen, and we actually saw it happen in one of the cases that was scheduled to go to trial in May, one of our cases. And one of my partners, Eric Dittman, negotiated with the other side basically an order extending the automatic stay for approximately 4 months from the court trial. And that we posited that could be a model for other cases. And in fact, it's now gotten a lot of press in the U.S. The New Jersey Law Journal's picked it up. We understand some judges have asked for copies of that order to see it as a model. So this actually may be a helpful model, but the effect of it is to basically give the judge a little breather to decide the case. I think that reflects, if you sort of zoom back on the whole situation, and that is that right now our clients themselves are dealing with the COVID situation in many different regards, whether it's corporate, employment. There's a lot of different things that are happening. And then at the same time, it's interesting to think about the lawyers and the law firms themselves having to adapt in order to continue to serve the clients who are themselves adapting, right? So, for example, in litigation, one of the other things we did is internally we sort of created a list of what are all the different aspects of litigation, and can we organize it by high impact, medium impact, low impact? And then for the high impact, what adaptations are available? And we sort of structured that within our practice to think about that and analyze it. And then, of course, the vendors are key because they provide so depositions. How do you get a deposition done when you can't be there in person? The vendors themselves are adapting. And then we're sort of harnessing that and filtering it into our practice. So the other day we did a deposition. I mean, it's happening a lot, but we did a deposition through Zoom with kind of a hot seat operator who would normally be used at a trial. But this hot seat operator now operates the documents that get shown to the witness. And it happened, and it was smooth, and it was fine. So you now repeat that pattern. So we internally as a firm, as a practice, have to make adaptations so that we can continue to function. But the end game of all of that is to help our clients who themselves are going through a very difficult time. And that's kind of the way we think about it.
Bruce, as the global co-chair of IP at Paul Hastings, you oversee the firm's 100-plus lawyer IP practice. What challenges and opportunities does the current situation present in this line of work in particular?
It's interesting. When this first started to happen, again, back beginning of March, I mean, it happened before then, but beginning of March is when, people were started to see office closings and just sort of feelings that was going to happen. I remembered that back in January, we had put on a conference around the JP Morgan Health Tech Conference, and it was about health tech. And we were talking about the convergence of life sciences and technology and how that change was happening on an exponential rate. And the challenge was to think exponentially because humans evolved to think linearly. We think one step at a time. But when confronted with exponential change, it is very hard to wrap your head around that because we're just not evolutionarily wired to think that way. And at the beginning of March, I told our team, I said, remember that health tech conference when we talked about technology and life sciences converging, thinking exponentially? I said, we have to think exponentially now because we are confronted with real exponential change, which is a virus spreading exponentially. The world is going to change at an exponential rate. Everything that's happening today is going to be twice the difference, 4 times the difference, and it's not going to be a stepwise. So the court closings, by the time the week ended when we set up that website, it was filled already with change. And so we started to think at that moment, I challenged everybody to think, how can we think exponentially about the future and what it's going to look like and how can we be prepared? And that's what we challenge ourselves to do. And I actually think as a society, that's our challenge. And that's why it's so difficult and so anxiety generating and so fear generating is because it is so hard to think that way. And the people who have really done a job of trying to think that way, you can see it giving us comfort when we hear them talk as though they're thinking that way. And so that, I think, has layered into our entire approach to how we're thinking about handling litigation. And each step, the court closings website, the getting this stay in place, all these sort of things ahead. It's just sort of how we're thinking.
So, Bruce, you have vast experience in IP litigation. Do you see the COVID-19 situation having a financial impact on IP stakeholders in the United States?
Yes. I mean, of course, the economy as a whole is being challenged, and the long-term effects, we're probably going to feel this for some time. That said, intellectual property, I've seen historically, whether it's the 2008 financial crisis, whether it was going back even to the 90s and some of the ups and downs. And what I've observed is the economy sort of cycles. The IP tends to cycle, but the amplitude is kind of reduced. So the economy kind of goes like this, and then IP, I feel, kind of goes like that. And so, maybe that's an artifact of if the economy is constricting, people are very concerned about competition if they have exclusivity. On the other hand, if they really need to compete and they're faced with someone attacking them, they have to defend themselves. So people kind of, hold on to their IP if the economy's tough. And if the economy's booming, well, then they're enjoying their IP. So, I think that contributes to the kind of the wave being a little bit more smaller in amplitude.
You also work as an adjunct professor of law at the New York University School of Law. As a seasoned IP expert working closely with experts of the near future, do you see COVID-19 leading young professionals in the field to develop or specialize in a particular set of skills, and any examples you can share with us?
I teach an advanced patent law course at NYU, life sciences patent law, and the students are very engaged. And the COVID-19 has really brought into the forefront how important innovation is, and how dependent we are on innovation by the biotech and pharma industries. And things like patent eligibility for diagnostic testing has now come up as a big thing, because we see how important diagnostic testing is. And if you can't get patents, what does that mean for innovation? And the students are very engaged on that. They're concerned, of course, about the future with the practical side of it, with law firms and summer programs and future jobs as lawyers. But I think they're also highly motivated by the prominence of the life sciences in this crisis. And I think they're eager to be part of it and help in any way they can. So that's kind of the energy that I'm seeing out of the students.
You've been protecting the innovators against the generic companies in some of the largest cases in life sciences. Do you see innovation companies during this time? Can you give any thoughts about compulsory licensing with regards to potentially saving lives in other countries?
So there's been discussion around the COVID and what is the relationship between IP and COVID. And, it's just been sort of discussions. There hasn't, in the US, there really, to my knowledge, hasn't been any real kind of sort of regulatory or legal push to actually do it. I think right now it feels like it's more of a policy that, in other words, the primary goal is to get a cure out there, get vaccines out there, get, assays out there, and people are sort of voluntarily working to that goal. So that said, but I think there is a mindset that, of course, there's still, a need to innovate, and there's still a need to invest. And I think right now I feel like the private sector is really working to try to balance where that's going to come out, recognizing that, there's going to need to be some return on investment for the investment. But on the other hand, where do you balance that in an economy that's struggling in a crisis situation? So I feel like right now it's largely in the hands, at least in the initial outset, in the private sector, how they're going to work through that.